Damn, Sino, back at it again with the most helpful League of Legends videos on YouTube. You heard it here first, guys. If you're watching this, it's because you want an insightful and easy to follow summary of patch 6.8 and how this affects the way you play the game for the duration of the patch. So that's exactly what I'm going to give you. Instead of revising every specific number change and all of that bullshit, I'm going to tell you exactly what you need to know going into this patch. Let's start with the champion changes. As you would all know by now, Tank Echo has been ridiculously broken for a while now, and Riot has done the right thing by giving his numbers a few tweaks. They've decreased the passive on-hit damage on his W and slightly increased the AP ratio. Also, his E-based damage has been slightly lowered and now scales better with AP. What these changes mean is that Tank Echo will be slightly easier to deal with after the nerfs, but definitely still pretty viable as a pick this patch. In my opinion, AP Echo wasn't in too bad of a place before these changes, but now he's even better. So mid lane Echo should be a pretty decent pick right now. And for those of you who prefer the tanky Echo, try swapping out a defensive item with something with more AP, seems like a pretty good option right now. Moving on, Galio's E costs less mana and grants more movement speed. The buff isn't huge, but for those of you who watched my video on OP champions in 6.7, you'd know that this makes the secretly powerful Galio an even more viable pick. If you haven't seen it, there's a link in the description below. I suggest you check it out for some insightful info on what makes a champion strong within a certain meta, with a specific example to Galio. So Graves has been given a slight nerf on his auto attacks, but increased damage to his crits. Definitely still a viable pick. We're likely to see more crit based builds on him this patch. I would suggest combining something like a Phantom Dancer with an Essence Reaver. Personally, I would suggest against building a static Shiv or Rapid Fire Cannon, as you would benefit more from an item that gives attack damage, like Essence Reaver, considering the very decent AD ratios on his abilities. Kog'Maw was given a buff on his armor and MR shred by his Q at early levels. This will mean he is an even better pick to deal with the countless tanks we see in this meta. His base on-hit damage given by his W has been decreased, meaning he will have slightly weaker lane phase, especially when trying to trade. Overall, this shouldn't change much about how Kog is played and how viable of a pick he is. So Master Yi has been slapped a decent amount, for less experienced players especially. His ult cooldown is higher and lasts for 3 seconds less than it previously did. This means players have to be more careful and selective of when they use it in fights. At the same time, his ulti reset duration, which is the extension he gets when he kills someone or gets an assist, has been increased. This means that if you manage to get a really good team fight or two in the mid game, where you can get a few resets, you will probably snowball even harder than before. But overall, this is definitely a nerf and a completely necessary one at that. Miss Fortune has fallen out of favor for a while, so Riot has given her a slight buff to her W attack speed duration and its cooldown. This is a decent buff, but won't sway MF too much from being a mid-tier ADC right now. Olaf has had his lifesteal increased on his W and his passive armor and MR increased on his ultimate. This is actually a pretty big buff, and I think we will see the resurgence of Olaf in the top lane and maybe also in the jungle. He will probably fly under the radar for a little bit until players realize how much this increases his early game dueling power, especially as a top laner. Definitely a pick worth considering this patch. Rumble is another champion that has fallen out of favor as of late, so now his Q does 100% damage to minions, increased from 50. This will push Rumble as a more viable pick in the jungle, but as it stands, Runic Echo has been nerfed a lot lately, so it won't make him much more viable than other AP junglers that can use it more effectively. Another reason I think so is because Riot effectively made Corki's package a better version of Rumble's ultimate, so I don't see much of a reason for anyone to want to pick Rumble nowadays. But to add to that, the cooldown on his ult was also lowered this patch. Moving on to the item changes. Iceborne Gauntlet's Sheen proc damage is now 100% bonus AD rather than 125. This upsets me because it's always been one of my favorite items in the game, but I think it was well deserved. It's also an indirect nerf to Tank Echo and a lot of other annoying tanks we see in the top and jungle. Hell, I've even seen supports building it. That's when you know it's OP. Still a viable item, but not as much of a staple on tanks as before, especially in extended team fights. The nerf will significantly lower the DPS it dishes out. What this nerf may also do is actually open up the window for Triforce to become a slightly more viable on the champions that had the option of building one or the other interchangeably. It also increases the viability of Frozen Mallet as an alternative option of CC for champions that can make the most of the slows. Mercurial Scimitar has been slightly nerfed on damage and cost effectiveness. The item itself is still really cost efficient, but I think Riot is trying to push it away from being a staple lifesteal item for all ADCs into something that you would only build situationally. Personally, I don't think the nerf was warranted, as ADCs are not in the best place as it is. This is definitely not going to improve that. Corrupting Potion now gives less health and more mana. This is essentially a slight nerf for most champions that buy this item, as Riot wants to push more players to opt for one of the Doran starting items where possible. The only other things to note are that the Feast Mastery cooldown has been increased slightly. It's still good, it just means that Double-Edged Sword is a slightly more viable alternative. And the health biscuits from Secret Stash now give 5 less health and 5 more mana, which will be almost completely unnoticeable, to be honest. And finally, Grasp of the Undying has been slightly nerfed to open options for other keystones to be used by top laners, but will probably remain as the go-to, especially for tankier champions. To wrap it up, the biggest things to watch out for this patch, I think, are the strength of Olaf in the top lane, the strength of AP Echo in the mid lane, and just between me and you, the secret strengths of Galio. Thanks for watching, everybody. As well as this video, I've uploaded a short video about a secret OP champion this patch, so be sure to check that out. The link for that one is also in the description. I've been Sino, and I will see you all very soon.